General Alexander Syrsky, commander of the Ukrainian army, said that the Russian troops retreated up to 2 kilometers in some areas of the city of Bakmit. The Russian army retreated at a distance of up to 2 kilometers on separate areas of the front in the direction of Bakmit. Thanks to the thoughtful defense in the direction of Bakmit, we are reaping the results of the effective actions of our units. Among other things, we made effective counterattacks. In some areas of the front, the enemy could not resist the onslaught of the Ukrainian defenders and had to retreat with a distance of up to 2 kilometers, said General Alexander Syrsky, commander of the Ukrainian army. No, as above. According to him, it was the proficient conduct of the defensive operation that exhausted Wagner's trained forces and caused them to be replaced in certain directions by poorly trained units of the Russian regular army. Units that have been defeated and withdrawn. Despite the significant concentration of troops and loud statements by Russian war criminals about their intention to capture Bakmit by May 9, the enemy was still unable to capture the Ukrainian city. Our defenses certainly held the front and prevented the enemy from advancing. The battle for Bakmit continues, said the commander of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Syrsky praised the work of the 3rd Ranger Brigade, which dealt a heavy blow to the enemy in battle and showed the strength of the Ukrainian army. 2. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin accused Russian regulars of fleeing, killing 500 Wagner soldiers. Moscow did not comment on reports that its 72nd Motorized Rifle Brigade had left its position in the southwestern suburbs of Bakmit. A Russian brigade is usually made up of several thousand troops. The eastern Ukrainian city was the main target of Moscow's major winter offensive and was the site of the bloodiest land war in Europe since World War II. Russian mercenary boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, who has repeatedly accused Moscow's regular armed forces of not providing adequate support to his own army leading the war in Bakmit, said the brigade Russia has fled from its position. Our army is on the run. The damn 72nd Brigade lost 3 square kilometers this morning, costing us about 500 men, said Prigozhin. Ukraine's 3rd Ranger Brigade said, it is official information. Prigozhin's report about the evacuation of the 72nd Independent Russian Motorized Rifle Brigade in Bakmit and the 500 corpses of Wagner troops left behind is true. The 3rd Ranger Brigade is grateful for being so public about our success at the front. Early Wednesday, the Ukrainian unit, formed last year from the Azov Regiment, retweeted a video of one of Azov's founders, Andriy Biletsky, who said his forces had to defeat the Traveler Russian delegation. In fact, the 6th and 8th companies of this brigade were almost completely destroyed, the brigade's intelligence was destroyed, a large number of combat vehicles were destroyed, a considerable number of prisoners were taken. 3. Ukraine's military says Russia has carried out unsuccessful attacks in many areas. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on the morning of Thursday, May 11, Ukrainian Defense Ministry spokesman Colonel Alexander Motuzianik said that Russian attacks were concentrated in 4 different areas of the Donetsk region, with the fiercest battles in the cities of Bakmit and Mariinka. Russia carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in Bakmit and the Avdiivka and Mariinka regions. Russian forces announced earlier on Wednesday that they had captured the village of Kamienka, north of Avdiivka, where Ukrainian forces had been besieged on 3 sides for several months. Ukraine has denied this claim. Farther south, where observers expect a Ukrainian counterattack would be concentrated, Russian forces are conducting defensive operations in the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions and have carried out a number of airstrikes. Size. Settlements near the front line were also shelled, including 35 airstrikes and 4 attacks from multiple launch rocket systems on Ukrainian military positions and settlements in the Kherson region. Colonel Alexander Motuzianik also stated that the Russians were evacuating civilians from the town of Tokmak in the Zaporizhia region to worse living conditions further south. The Russian invaders, under the pretext of evacuating civilians, continue to take looted property from the frontline settlements of the Zaporizhia region, he added, adding that medical facilities are in the city. Enerhodar was looted. The Ukrainian Air Force has carried out a number of attacks, including one against a Russian electronic warfare unit. The Ukrainians appear to be trying to disrupt both the communications and electronic warfare capabilities of the Russian military before a counterattack. Fourth, Ukraine says Wagner units have withdrawn to Bakmit due to alleged lack of coordination with Russian troops. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on Thursday morning, May 11, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said that fighters from the Wagner private military group had been withdrawn from other areas where they were carrying out their operations. Combat mission to bring back to Bakmit city battlefield. She said they have been replaced by regular Russian troops in areas that have just withdrawn. As the situation around Bakmit seems to be turning more smoothly, the Ukrainian army has regained more and more positions in the past few days. Russian military bloggers also make similar reports, but they complain that there is little coordination between Wagner fighters and Russian forces. The head of the mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, also made complaints about this lack of coordination. Earlier, Prigozhin said a Russian brigade had abandoned its position south of Bakmit, resulting in many casualties for his fighters. 5. Russia accuses Ukraine of cross-border attack on Kursk. According to Reuters, on Wednesday afternoon, the governor of the region Roman Starovoyt told local television that Ukrainian troops had attacked across the border and that Russian air defenses shot down a drone of enemy in the Kursk region bordering Ukraine. Debris fell on the village of Tolmachevo. No one was hurt, Starovoyt said, adding that falling debris damaged a gas pipeline and a house. Ukraine almost never openly claims responsibility for attacks inside Russia and on Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine. However, Kyiv recently said that sabotaging Russia's logistics was part of preparations for a planned counterattack. 6. Russia accuses Ukrainian forces of cross-border drone attacks on Belgorod and Bryansk regions. Additional drone strikes have been carried out on Russia's Belgorod region on the border with Ukraine, Belgorod Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov said on Wednesday. Gladkov said 2 drones exploded and crashed in a private residential area in the area. No casualties were reported, but 2 residential buildings and a car were damaged, he added. Gladkov said another drone was shot down by Russian air defenses in the area. The governor said there were no casualties and response teams were assessing the aftermath on the ground. Bryansk Governor Alexander Bogomaz said a drone strike hit Bryansk, another Russian region on the border with Ukraine. Bogomaz said there were no casualties and an administrative building was attacked in Stardaub. He added that response teams are working on site. Speak. 7. How Putin's victory parade speech has changed dramatically from last year. Newsweek ran an article titled, How Putin's Victory Parade Speech Changed Drastically from Last Year, which means, how Putin's victory speech has changed dramatically from last year. The tone and content of Vladimir Putin's Victory Day parade speech on Tuesday was vastly different from last year's speech, with the Russian president saying war was being waged with Russia after avoided using the word in 2022. Victory Day is the celebration of Moscow's defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II, known in Russia as the Great Patriotic War. Putin was once again the protagonist of the annual festivities, delivering a speech in Red Square before a military parade. This year's event took place in a more concise fashion because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which resulted in significant loss of personnel and equipment after nearly 15 months of war. One of the obvious observations was the lack of participation of Russian servicemen. The Russian-language news agency Agentstvo noted that this year's 8,000 soldiers marched the smallest number since 2008 and nearly 3,000 fewer than last year's Victory Day. About 14,000 soldiers took part in 2020. The lack of military equipment is obvious, with only 1 tank, an old Soviet T-34, participating in the parade compared to 10 T-72s, 3 armadas and 7 tanks. The T-90 was paraded last year. Armored systems, Tiger, Ural, Kamaz, missile systems, Iskander, S-400, Yars, and armored personnel carriers Boomerang also paraded this year. Last year, Putin did not use the word war to directly describe the conflict he unleashed in Ukraine. On Tuesday, the dictator said war was being waged on Russia. Today, our civilization is at an important turning point. A real war is being waged against our country once again, but we have fought international terrorism and will protect the people of Donbass and protect our security. He continued that Russia does not want an unfriendly or hostile state in the West or the East, and that Russia also wants a future of peace, freedom and stability. Putin used the word Ukraine this year after not uttering the word in 2022, essentially saying the country is listening to the whims of Western nations whose goals include separation and destroy our country, nullify the outcome of World War II, completely disrupt the global security system and international law, to stifle any sovereign development hub. Unlimited ambition, arrogance, and impunity inevitably lead to tragedies, Putin said. This is the reason for the disaster that the Ukrainian people are experiencing. They have become hostages to the coup d'état and the consequent criminal regime of the Western masters, the damage being the inevitable consequence of the execution of their evil and self-seeking plans. In the next paragraph, he praises the United States and the United Kingdom for being courageous against fascism and China for fighting against Japanese militarism. While Nazism is mentioned as many times as last year, Putin has used more aggressive language to evoke the term when it comes to the West, which the Russian leader has said, "Forget who destroyed that utter monstrous evil, who stood up for their homeland and did not spare their lives to liberate the peoples of Europe. We see in some countries that they ruthlessly and coldly destroyed memorials to Soviet soldiers, destroyed monuments to great commanders, created a real cult of Germany," he said. "The Nazis and their proxies erase and smear the memory of real heroes. It is also a crime to insult the feats and sacrifices of the victorious generation, which demands an outright retaliation against those who are blatantly preparing and defying a military operation. New to Russia and who have gathered neo-Nazi scum from all over the world for this." After criticizing NATO last year for launching an active military buildup, Putin made no mention of NATO in this year's speech. Mikhail Troitsky, a professor of practice at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, told Newsweek that Putin's Victory Day speech last year didn't meet the expectations of supporters of the Ukraine invasion who desired immediate escalation, mobilizing civilians, and changing the wording to call for an all-out war instead of a special military operation. The 2022 speech was quite long, but it did not address the key questions about the means, ends, and prospects of the war and, therefore, was disappointing, Troitsky said. In his Victory Day 2023 speech, Putin tried to be more explicit, but failed to announce important decisions, such as declaring war openly or making explicit threats, such as the use of nuclear weapons. Putin's deliberate phrasing, which includes Western globalist elites and provocations to bloody conflict, can be seen as a prelude to new Russian mobilization efforts as the war continues. However, Troitsky noted, Putin acknowledged the American and British efforts in World War II and did not make any specific threats or attacks. One factor against Putin's announcement of extraordinary measures in Red Square could be the presence of 7 foreign leaders at the parade, and possibly the result of an agreement, he said. Tacit agreement that made their visit possible. One of those 7 heads of state, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, is Putin's most loyal ally. Lukashenko, a staunch ally of Putin, is said to have left the festivities early and was seen with a bandaged hand, sparking new speculation about his health. 8. The Kremlin admits that the operation in Ukraine is very difficult. That special military operation in Ukraine was described by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov as very difficult, but said several goals had been achieved over the past year. Speaking to Bosnian Serb TV channel ATV in a speech published by Russia's state news agency TASS on Wednesday, Peskov said Russia was acting slowly in Ukraine because it was moving ahead. A special military operation, not a war. He acknowledged the Ukrainian stronghold in the eastern city of Bakmit and said, a large number of Ukrainian troops are concentrated there, which is constantly receiving reinforcements. Mr. Peskov said the West had made many mistakes and cheated Russia, prompting Russia to launch an operation in Ukraine, which he said the West was involved in. He called the recent drone attacks on the Kremlin a targeted terrorist attack against Russian President Vladimir Putin. In doing so, Mr. Peskov stressed that Ukraine had identified itself with state sponsors of terrorism. He said Russia will take all necessary security measures after the incident. Ukrainian and U.S. officials have repeatedly denied being behind the drone attack on the Kremlin. Referring to the order of the International Criminal Court, or ICC for short, issued against Putin earlier this year, Peskov said, it is difficult to imagine that anyone in the world would seriously consider this issued an ICC order to Putin, the leader of a nuclear power. Peskov told the television channel that his country is too strong a country to give up its stance in the face of pressure from the West, adding that the Kremlin will not contact the media. The West, until they begin to show an interest in the truth. 9. After Estonia, France and Lithuania, Britain is planning to designate the Wagner mercenary group as a terrorist organization. The London Times in its report on Wednesday, May 10 suggested that the UK government may be planning to designate the Wagner mercenary group as a terrorist organization, following the lead of Estonia, France and Lithuania. The newspaper wrote, Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin, 61, used British courts to sue Elliot Higgins, a British journalist, after his website Bellingcat revealed the group's shady activities. The case was dropped last March after the outbreak of war in Ukraine and individual sanctions were imposed on Prigozhin, but government sources said during the court investigation it had been found information that could help block Wagner's influence and activities in Britain. There is no evidence that Wagner or individuals associated with it have been active in the UK since the war in Ukraine began, and the move to label Wagner's group as a terrorist is largely symbolic. However, a government source said there were suspects that the group helped launder money out of the UK along with organized crime groups after financial sanctions were imposed on them, with Russian oligarchs and Putin's allies after the war. So it can have effects in practice. 10. What are the consequences of Wagner being classified as a terrorist group? Being listed as a terrorist organization means that EU members can freeze the assets of the Wagner Group and its members, and ban European companies and citizens from doing business with the group. This Prigozhin had his assets frozen in the European Union in 2020 and put on a visa blacklist due to the deployment of Wagner fighters to war-torn Libya, a decision that he appealed but was unsuccessful. France's Foreign Minister, Catherine Colonna, acknowledged to lawmakers on Tuesday that legally, the European Union's terrorist label would not have any direct additional impact on the group. But we should not underestimate the symbolic importance of such designation, nor the deterrent effect it may have on countries wishing to do business with Wagner. In the UK, blacklisting would make it a criminal offence to belong to Wagner, attend Wagner meetings, promote its support or carry its emblem in public, The Times said. The UK will impose financial sanctions on the group and will have an impact on Wagner's ability to raise money if any money goes through UK financial institutions. 11. Russia launched an unguided missile into the Chernihiv region. Russian combat helicopters on Wednesday, May 10, launched unguided missiles at areas of the Chernihiv region bordering the Russian Federation. Spokesman of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Colonel Alexander Motuzianik said. As of 2100 hours on May 10, the Russian army shelled the border of the Chernihiv region 3 times. From 1310 to 1320, the Russians shelled the village of Boyaro-Lazachi, likely using 120mm mortars. Around 1805, 3 attacks were recorded in the area of Krasny Kutir village, likely involving unguided rockets launched from helicopters. In the Bleshnia village area, from 1805 to 1810, 5 attacks were recorded, possibly 82mm mortars. In all 3 cases, there were no reports of casualties or damage to civilian infrastructure. 12. Czech Republic hands over 2 Kub air defense systems to Ukraine. The Czech Republic will provide Ukraine with 2 Kub air defense systems and missiles. The President of the Czech Republic Petr Pavel said the above. There are now 2 more Kub air defense systems with a sizable number of missiles being delivered, which Ukraine can use immediately because the soldiers have been trained in such devices, Pavel said. He also said that it is appropriate to consider supplying Ukraine with Czech L-159 fighters. The president of Czechoslovakia realized that Ukraine needed aviation to prepare for the decisive phase of the war. Pavel noted that Western countries have so far limited the supply of modern fighters because the preparation for their use takes a relatively long time and because the aircraft contain secret systems. The Allies also do not want these devices to fall into Russian hands. But I know that negotiations are going on, and let us be surprised if Ukraine ends up receiving a few F-16s, perhaps with some of the equipment removed, he said. According to Pavel, the decisive factor for Ukraine is having enough armored vehicles and weapons. The former NATO general said, Ukraine lacks this because a decisive part of the battle will have to be on the ground. He recalled that Ukraine received about 100 tanks, the same number of armored vehicles and a lot of ammunition from the Czech Republic. The Soviet Kub system, nicknamed the 3 Fingers of Death for its looks, was used to attack aircraft and helicopters. It will be replaced by Israeli Spider missile systems in the Czech army. 13. Vladimir Putin signed a decree calling for reservists to train in 2023. According to a document published Wednesday on a government website, reservists have been called to present themselves for military training. The document states that the training of these Russian citizens, who are in the armed reserve, is an annual event planned. The reserve force was partially mobilized last September, when the Kremlin sought to bolster its forces amid a swift counterattack by Ukrainian troops. 14. Poland summons the Russian ambassador after the fighter jet crashes into the Polish plane. Polish Foreign Ministry spokesman Łukasz Jasina said Poland summoned the Russian ambassador to protest on Wednesday after a Russian fighter jet intercepted a Polish border patrol plane last week and almost caused a collision. We strongly condemn the provocative and belligerent behavior of the Russian side, which is a serious international incident, Jasina said. A Russian Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jet intercepted a Polish border police aircraft on a mission over the Black Sea near the Romanian border on Friday, Romanian authorities said Sunday. The Romanian Defense Ministry said the incident happened on Friday morning, about 60 kilometers east of Romanian airspace. Polish aircraft were there as part of a joint mission coordinated by the European Union's border patrol system Frontex. According to the Romanian Defense Ministry, the mission, which will last until mid-December, focuses on preventing illegal migration, illegal fishing, marine pollution and other transboundary crimes in the Western Hai. Russian Su-35 jets flew into the area with radios turned off and performed aggressive and dangerous maneuvers.